The rain had been falling for hours, soaking the dirt path until it became little more than a ribbon of mud winding through the woods. Clara's boots, once polished and proud, were caked in slush and torn at the seam. Her coat clung to her like a second skin, heavy with water and grief. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go back. Behind her lay a trail of loss. Her mother, the only family she had left, had passed just 2 weeks ago, taken suddenly by a fever that no doctor could cure. And just days after she buried her, Clara found the letter, the one hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the parlor. A letter from her fiancé to another woman. "I'll marry her for the land," he'd written. "Once her mother's gone, she'll be easier to manage." The words didn't just shatter her heart, they made her question everything she thought. She knew that, so Clara ran. She packed what little she could, left behind the small house her mother had loved, and followed the old trail westward through the forest with no destination in mind. Maybe she thought walking far enough would wear out the ache in her chest. Maybe she hoped the trees would silence the thoughts screaming in her head. But as the storm deepened and the cold bit through her skin, all she could feel was the weight of being completely, utterly alone. She stumbled, falling to her knees beside a thick oak tree, her breath coming out in sobs. Her hands, scraped and muddy, pressed against her face. She let herself cry, silent, broken, hunched over like the grief would break her in two. Then she heard it. Not thunder, not wind, a voice. "Don't cry, miss." Clara lifted her head, startled. Standing a few feet away was a little girl no more than 6 or 7, with tangled dark curls and mismatched clothes. Her yellow rubber boots were too big, and one of her sleeves was rolled up crooked. But her eyes were clear and steady, too wise for her age. Clara blinked, unsure if she was seeing a spirit or a child. The girl stepped forward through the drizzle and added, in a soft, matter-of-fact tone, "My daddy helps sad folks." Clara sat still, rain dripping from her hair, unsure what to say. The girl wasn't afraid. She held out her hand, small and muddy and certain. "You want to come?" The forest was vast. The road behind her was full of pain. But in that moment, something about the girl, her calmness, her strange confidence, the way she didn't ask questions, cut through Clara's sorrow like a match in the dark. Clara hesitated, then nodded slowly. She reached out and took the girl's hand. It was warm. Without a word, the child turned and began to lead her off the main path into the trees. The mud sucked at Clara's boots, the branches snagged at her coat, but she followed. The girl didn't rush. She walked like she knew the way by heart, occasionally humming a tune soft and familiar. Clara caught the melody and froze. It was her mother's lullaby, the same one that used to hush her to sleep on stormy nights. Her throat tightened, but the girl didn't look back. "How do you know that song?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse. The girl just shrugged. "Daddy plays it sometimes when he's sad too." They walked on. Minutes passed, or maybe longer, until the trees parted and a clearing opened ahead. Nestled between 2 old oaks was a cabin, small, weathered, but sturdy. Warm light flickered behind the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, curling into the damp sky. Clara slowed, uncertain. The girl looked back at her, her hand still gently holding Clara's. "He won't ask why you're sad," she said simply. "He just knows how to help." And with that, she pulled open the old wooden door. Light spilled out onto the porch. Clara squinted into it, not sure whether she was stepping into shelter or something deeper. But with nowhere left to go and nothing more to lose, Clara stepped forward into the unknown, guided not by reason, but by the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this little girl was right. Clara stood just inside the doorway, blinking against the golden glow of the cabin. The scent of wood smoke, pine, and something warm, maybe soup-wrapped, around her like a heavy quilt. For the first time in weeks, her body didn't feel so tense. Still, she didn't dare move far from the door. Her heart thudded in her chest. A quiet panic coiled under her ribs. This was someone else's home. What if she'd made a mistake? The little girl didn't seem concerned in the slightest. She tugged off her oversized yellow boots, leaving them in a puddle near the hearth, then turned to Clara with a grin that somehow felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You can sit," she said simply, patting a chair by the fire. "That? Once for folks who look tired." Clara remained still. Her clothes dripped rain onto the hardwood floor. A part of her wanted to bolt back into the forest, back to her pain. But the child's words made her pause. "Daddy!" The girl called, her voice soft but clear. She came. Footsteps thudded down a hallway, and then he appeared. He wasn't what Clara expected. He looked younger than she imagined, maybe in his late 30s, with dark, slightly graying hair that curled near his ears and a beard that looked more out of habit than fashion. His flannel sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, hands still stained with the kind of work that required tools and strength. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's breath, warm, steady, and quietly worn. Eyes that had seen pain but didn't flinch from it. He paused when he saw her, taking in her soaked dress, the slumped shoulders, the haunted eyes. She was crying. The girl explained matter-of-factly, standing beside Clara like a little guard dog. "So I brought her here, like Mama said." The man looked from his daughter to Clara, a flicker of emotion passing over his face, surprise, concern, maybe recognition of a pain he once carried himself. "Thank you, Lily," he said gently, kneeling beside his daughter and brushing her damp hair back. "You did good." Then he stood and turned to Clara. "You're welcome to stay here," he said, voice deep but even. "We've got dry clothes, a warm fire, and soup on the stove. That's all we can offer. But sometimes it's enough." Clara wanted to speak, to say thank you, to explain who she was or why she looked like she hadn't slept in days, but the words caught in her throat. Her lip trembled instead. The man didn't press. He just nodded toward the fire again. "Sit as long as you need. I'll grab something for you to change into." With that, he moved down the hallway and disappeared behind a curtain. Clara walked slowly toward the fire, her limbs stiff from the cold and her heartbeat loud in her ears. She lowered herself into the chair. It creaked but welcomed her like an old friend. She reached her hands out toward the flames, trembling from more than just the weather. The little girl, Lily, plopped down cross-legged near the hearth, pulling a carved wooden horse from beneath the bench. "I found this yesterday," she said proudly. "Daddy said it used to be mine when I was little, but I don't remember it." Clara smiled weakly. "How old are you now?" "7," Lily replied. "Almost 8. I'm big enough to help." She looked up at Clara with a serious expression. "Are you here because something broke inside you?" Clara's mouth parted, startled by the question. Lily continued, undeterred. "It's okay. Lots of folks come here like that. Daddy says they're not broken, just bent. Bent people can still grow." Clara didn't know what to say. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they didn't fall from despair. Something about this place, this girl, this strange moment was softening the edges of her pain. The man returned with a folded flannel shirt and thick wool pants. "Here," he said, setting them on the arm of the chair. "Bathroom's through. There, take your time." She nodded, whispering a thank you that barely escaped her lips. As she stood, Lily reached up and touched Clara's hand. "You're gonna be okay," she said quietly, with the fierce certainty only a child can have. "Daddy helped sad folks. He helped me after Mama went away." Clara looked down at the girl. This wasn't a dream. This was a beginning. The bathroom was small but warm, with soft towels and the faint scent of lavender soap. Clara changed slowly, her body stiff from the cold and her muscles sore from days of walking. She peeled off the soaked dress like it was a layer of old skin one she no longer wanted to wear. The flannel shirt the man had given her was too big, but it smelled clean, like pine and wood smoke. The wool pants scratched at her legs, but she welcomed the discomfort. It was grounding, real. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection startled her. The woman staring back had shadows under her eyes, mud in her hairline, and a weight behind her gaze that hadn't been there before. She didn't look like the woman who had once planned a spring wedding, who had danced barefoot in the kitchen with her mother, who had believed in beginnings. She looked like someone who had been through a storm and barely made it out. Clara swallowed hard, splashed water on her face, and stepped out into the hallway. The cabin was quiet now. A low hum came from the other room, Lily singing to herself. Clara followed the sound, her bare feet brushing against worn rugs as she moved. She found them in the small kitchen. Lily was sitting at the table, drawing with colored pencils on scraps of brown paper. The man stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot. He didn't turn when Clara entered, but he gestured with a tilt of his head. "Soup's almost done. Hope you like rabbit and root vegetables. It's not fancy, but it's hot." Clara nodded, then realized he couldn't see her. "It sounds perfect," she said quietly. He looked over his shoulder, offered a small smile. "Good." Lily looked up from her drawing. "Did the clothes fit okay?" "Yes," Clara replied. "Thank you, sweetheart." Lily beamed and went back to sketching. Clara saw a child's version of the cabin, surrounded by trees and stars, with 3 stick figures holding hands. It nearly broke her heart. "Mind if I ask your name?" The man said as he filled 2 bowls. "Clara," she said. "Clara Ames." He handed her a bowl and nodded. "Elias Harper." "That one," he tilted his head toward Lily, "is the boss around here." "I heard," Clara said with a faint smile. "She's got a strong spirit." "She gets that from her mother," Elias replied, voice softening, "and maybe a little from these woods." They sat in silence for a few minutes, eating. The soup was better than she expected, flavorful, comforting. It warmed her from the inside out. Her stomach had felt hollow for days, and now it slowly began to settle. After the meal, Elias leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment, not prying, not judgmental, just present. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said quietly, "but if you need to talk, I'm a good listener." Clara stared down at her hands. "I walked away from everything," she said, the words tasting strange in her mouth. "I didn't even leave a note, just packed a bag and left." Elias didn't respond immediately. "That's not weakness, Clara," he said finally. "Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing a person can do." She looked up, surprised. "I didn't feel strong," she whispered. "You don't have to," he said. "Surviving doesn't always look brave. Sometimes it just looks like showing up cold and broken on someone's porch." They sat like that for a while, no rush, no pressure, just a quiet understanding that hung in the air like the scent of pine wood. Later, Lily offered to show Clara her favorite tree in the back meadow. Clara hesitated at first, but the child's eagerness was infectious. As they stepped outside, the rain had finally stopped. The forest glistened, leaves dripping like crystals, the sky softening into a pale blue-gray. The air smelled clean, earthy, alive. They walked a winding path that curved behind the cabin. The trees arched overhead like a cathedral, their branches brushing the sky. "Sometimes I think the trees listen," Lily said as she skipped ahead. "I talk to them when I miss Mama." Clara followed, her heart tightening. She'd never known a child to speak with such depth. The meadow opened before them like a secret. In the center stood a wide oak tree, massive and gnarled with age. A low branch had been carved into a seat. Lily hopped up onto it, swinging her legs. "I come here when I feel sad," she said. "It helps." Clara stood beside her, looking. Out at the woods, the mist still clinging to the grass. She didn't say anything, but she felt it. A shift inside her. Small but real. Maybe this wasn't just a detour. Maybe it was the beginning of something she hadn't dared hope for. The sun was sinking when they returned from the meadow, casting long golden streaks across the cabin walls. Clara paused at the porch steps, glancing up at the weathered structure. In the fading light, the cabin didn't look run down or lonely. It looked lived in, honest, as if it had stood through storms and sorrow and still remained standing, quietly waiting for those who needed it most. Lily skipped ahead, already pulling her boots back on. "Daddy says we leave the porch light on, even if we don't know who's coming. Mama said light means hope." Clara looked at the lantern hanging beside the door. It wasn't bright, but it flickered steadily against the shadows gathering in the trees. Hope. It had never felt so fragile or so precious. Inside, Elias was stoking the fire and setting out a second blanket near the hearth. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable, but there was something steady about him. Solid, like a tree that didn't shake in the wind. "There's a cot made up in the back room," he said. "You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." Clara hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden. I'll be gone by morning." "You're not a burden," Elias replied gently. "You're a guest. No rush to leave, not unless you truly want to." She didn't answer, because she didn't know. He nodded as if he understood that too. "I left the radio on in there. Sometimes the old music helps." Clara murmured a soft thank you and turned down the hall, following the same path she had earlier. The door to the back room creaked open to reveal a cozy space, small but clean. A wooden cot stood against the far wall, layered in soft quilts. The windows were cracked just enough to let in the cool forest air. And sure enough, a low tune hummed from a battered old radio on the dresser, an instrumental version of an old folk melody she hadn't heard in years. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers over the stitching in the quilt. Each patch was different flannel, denim, faded cotton. Pieces of someone's past, carefully sewn into something that could keep another person warm. That thought made her throat tighten. Later that night, after she'd washed up and changed, again, she wandered back into the main room. Elias was seated at the kitchen table, a mug of tea steaming in front of him. He looked up as she entered. "Couldn't sleep?" "Not yet," Clara admitted. "Too much in my head." He nodded, motioned to the chair across from him. "Tea's still warm." She joined him, wrapping her hands around the mug. It smelled of mint and something earthy. "Your daughter," she began softly. "She's remarkable." Elias smiled, faintly, eyes full of quiet pride. "Yeah, she saved me. After my wife passed, I didn't know how to breathe without her. I stopped trying, but Lily, she kept bringing light into the dark, even when I didn't want it. She said you help." A deep pull. He exhaled, nodding once. "Not because I'm wise or special, just because I know what it's like to lose your way. Sometimes folks show up here without knowing why. I don't have answers, but I can offer a place to rest." Clara looked down at her tea, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't just lose my way. I think I lost myself." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Losing yourself doesn't mean you're gone. It just means you've been carrying something too heavy for too long. Sometimes you've got to set it down, even if it's just for one night." Clara blinked back sudden tears. This man barely knew her. And yet, somehow, he saw the invisible. Weight on her shoulders, the grief, the betrayal, the guilt. "Why do you leave the porch light on?" she asked. He gave her a small, tired smile. because most people don't show up unless they've already walked through a lot of dark. They sat there in the warm silence, two people who had been torn open by life, quietly learning that maybe, just maybe, healing didn't have to start with answers. Maybe it started with a cup of tea, a child's faith, and a porch light left burning. When Clara finally went back to the little room, the world outside was silent, the forest hushed as if holding its breath. She crawled into bed, pulled the patchwork quilt over her shoulders, and closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't dream of what she'd lost. She dreamed of a cabin in the woods and the light that never went out. The next morning arrived gently, like the forest knew Clara needed it that way. Soft light filtered through the window panes, casting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Outside, birds chirped cautiously, the kind that waited until the storm passed before singing again. Clara lay still for a while, wrapped in the patchwork quilt, eyes open but unfocused, her breath slow and steady. For the first time in days, her sleep hadn't been haunted. No dreams of her mother's fevered hand slipping from hers. No visions of her fiance's lies and the sharp betrayal etched in ink. Only quiet. Deep, unfamiliar quiet. Eventually, she swung her legs over the side of the cot and stood. Her body was still sore, but her limbs felt less like stone. As she moved toward the door, she noticed a clean flannel shirt and folded pair of jeans laid neatly on a stool. A note was tucked beneath them in neat handwriting. Figured these might fit better. "Coffee's on if you want some." "Aye," Clara smiled faintly. She hadn't realized how starved she'd been, not just for warmth or food, but for simple kindness. She changed quickly and followed the smell of brewing coffee into the main room. Elias was by the stove again, frying something in a cast iron skillet. Lily sat at the table, legs swinging, scribbling in a little notebook with fierce concentration. "Morning," Elias said, glancing over his shoulder. "Sleep all right?" Clara nodded. "Better than I expected." He motioned toward the mugs on the counter. "Help yourself. Bacon and eggs if you're hungry." She poured herself a cup and joined them at the table. Lily looked up and grinned, holding out her notebook. "Want to see the story I'm writing?" Clara smiled. "Sure." The drawing showed a little cabin surrounded by trees, with stick figures of a man, a girl, and a woman. Above them, in blocky letters, Lily had written, "The lady who got lost found the porch light." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the sudden warmth in her chest. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Elias slid a plate in front of her, and she realized how hungry she was. She ate in silence for a few minutes, grateful not to be filling the air with small talk. Everything here, the cabin, the woods, this little family, it all moved at a quieter rhythm. It didn't demand explanations, but still, a question itched in the back of her mind. She set her fork down and looked at Elias. "Why do you live out here? Away from everything?" Elias leaned against the counter, crossing his arms loosely. His face was calm, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a shadow briefly passing over still water. "After my wife passed," he said, "I couldn't stay in town. Everything reminded me of her. Every store, every road, every place we used to go. I couldn't breathe. So I came out here with Lily. I figured we'd stay until I could figure out how to live again." He gave a small, tired laugh. "That was almost 6 years ago." Clara felt her chest tighten. "Was it hard, raising her alone?" "Still is," he admitted, "but not in the way you'd think. Lily, she's got this light in her. It cuts through a lot of the dark. Most days I'm just trying not to get in the way of it." Clara looked at the little girl who had gone back to drawing, humming softly to herself. "She's the one who found me," Clara said. Elias nodded. "She's got a sense for people, especially the ones carrying something heavy. I think she recognized something in you." "I didn't think anyone would," Clara said quietly. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. Elias didn't speak right away. Then he said, "Grief's like that. It makes you forget who you are, but it doesn't erase you. It just buries you for a while." He walked to the table, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat down. "You don't have to tell me what happened," he said. "Not unless it helps. But you're not the first soul to walk up to that porch with their world in pieces. You won't be the last." Clara looked at him, really looked at him, not just at his words, but the man behind them. He wasn't just someone who had survived heartbreak. He was someone who had learned how to live with it and somehow offer shelter to others still drowning in theirs. She didn't know how long she'd stay, or what would come next, but for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she had to figure it all out today. She was here, alive, warming, her hands around a mug of coffee in a quiet cabin in the woods, and the man across from her, steady, kind, and weathered by life, was the first person in a long time who made her feel like she might be more than just what she'd lost. Later that afternoon, the rain began again, just a soft drizzle tapping against the cabin's tin roof. Clara stood by the window, watching the gray curtain drift through the trees. It didn't bother her the way it had the day before. Maybe it was the hot food. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way Elias never once looked at her like she was. Broken. Behind her, the fire in the hearth crackled, low and steady. It filled the room with a gentle warmth that settled into her bones. "You can sit there if you'd like," Elias said, motioning to the worn armchair beside the fire. "That's the one people usually pick when they've got something there." Trying not to say. Clara smiled faintly, but she took the seat anyway. It hugged her like an old friend. The kind you didn't need to impress. Lily sat nearby, braiding yarn into a long, lopsided chain. She didn't ask questions. She didn't press. She just existed, humming under her breath like a bird nesting beside a storm. Clara stared into the fire, eyes tracing the dance of the flames. The silence in the room didn't feel awkward. It felt like an invitation. "I thought I was going to marry him," Clara said suddenly. The words came out flat, as if she didn't even realize she'd spoken them. Elias didn't move. He just stayed seated in the rocking chair across from her, elbows on his knees, listening. "We were engaged 3 years. I thought we were building a life. Then my mama got sick and everything changed." She paused, eyes locked on the embers. "I took care of her day and night. He started staying away longer. Said he had work. Said he was busy. But after she passed, I found a letter he wrote to someone else." Her voice broke. She tried to swallow it down. "He said I'd be easier to control once my mama was gone. That he was marrying me for the land." Lily stopped braiding and looked up with wide, quiet eyes. Elias stayed still. Clara drew a shaky breath. "So I ran. I couldn't bear to look at the house, at the mirror, at myself. I didn't even think. I just kept walking. And then your little girl found me in the woods." Elias's voice, when it came, was low and sure. "You don't owe that man a single memory, Clara." She looked up, startled. "I know what betrayal feels like," he continued. "I know how it poisons everything. You start blaming yourself, asking what you did wrong, wondering if you were too much or not enough. But that's not your weight to carry." Clara blinked back tears. The flames blurred in her vision. "Why does it still hurt so much, even when I know I was right to leave?" "Because love doesn't shut off like a lamp," he said simply. "Even when it's poisoned, it leaves behind echoes. And grief doesn't just come when someone dies. It comes when something you believed in dies too." Clara looked back at the fire. It didn't judge her. It just burned, quiet and steady, no matter what story was laid before it. "I haven't told anyone," she whispered. "Not a soul. I just disappeared. You didn't disappear, Elias said. You survived. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. How did you survive your wife? The pain in his eyes was old, but still there. Some days I didn't, he admitted. But Lily needed me, and I realized maybe the point wasn't to fix the hole she left. Maybe it was just to keep walking with it. Let it be part of who I am, but not all that I am. They sat in silence again. But this time, it was full of truth. Full of wounds aired out in the open. The fire popped. Lily got up and gently placed her finished yarn braid in Clara's lap. It's not perfect, she said, but it holds. Clara smiled through her tears. I think I needed to hear that, she said. Elias gave a small nod, as if to say, so did I. Outside. The storm continued. Inside, the fire kept burning. And for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel like she had to explain her pain to be worthy of warmth. She was simply allowed to be. That night, the wind picked up. It wasn't a violent storm, nothing like the thunder and fury that had driven Clara into the forest days ago, but it carried a kind of ache, like the trees themselves were whispering old regrets to each other. The cabin creaked now and then, wood settling, as if stretching out its tired frame to shelter the souls inside. Clara lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, the quilt pulled to her chin. Sleep wouldn't come. Not because she wasn't exhausted, she was, but because she felt a stirring inside her, something uncoiled, something long buried. She pushed off the covers and stepped out of the small bedroom, bare feet quiet on the hardwood. The fire in the hearth was nothing but red coals now, but Elias sat nearby, a mug in hand, his profile lit dimly by the flicker of dying embers. He didn't startle when she entered. He didn't speak. He just looked up, eyes soft, and motioned to the chair across from him. Clara sat. Neither of them said a word for a long while. The silence felt natural, even needed. But eventually she broke it. Why do you stay here? She asked. Still, after all these years, Elias didn't answer right away. He swirled the tea in his mug, staring into the coals. I used to think I was hiding, he said finally. From grief, from guilt, from people who looked at me like I should have gotten over it already. His voice was calm, but it held weight. Then one morning, I realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I just found a place where I didn't have to pretend, where I could live with the shadow beside me and not feel ashamed of it. Clara leaned forward slightly. Guilt? He nodded. My wife, Mara, had cancer, and I tried everything doctors, herbs, prayers, but it wasn't enough. The last few weeks were hard. I said things I wish I hadn't, lost my temper when I should have held her tighter. I was angry at the world, at her for leaving, at myself. Clara's throat tightened. I know that kind of guilt, she said softly. I took care of my mama too, but some nights I just wanted it to be over. Then she died, and I hated myself forever thinking that. Elias looked at her. That's not hatred. That's grief talking through exhaustion. You stayed. That's what matters. Clara's hands trembled in her lap. Sometimes I wonder if she knew how scared I was, how angry I got, if she forgave me before she went. Elias set his mug down, folding his hands together. She did, he said, because she was a mother, and mothers don't keep score in their final hours. They just want their children to be okay. Clara looked into the fire, her chest aching, her heart trying to believe him. He went on. I spent years thinking I failed, Mara, but then Lily would laugh or sing or curl up beside me when I thought I couldn't take another day, and I'd remember. Love doesn't die when someone's gone. It keeps showing up in the small things, in what we build from what's left. Tears slipped quietly down Clara's face. She didn't wipe them away. And what do you build from betrayal? She asked, voice raw. Elias was quiet for a moment. Yourself. He said, Not the version he wanted you to be. Not the one that stayed silent when you were hurting. You build the woman who chose her own worth, who walked away, who found her way to a porch light in the woods. A log shifted in the hearth. Sparks rose briefly before dying into red again. They sat with their shadows, grief, guilt, betrayal laid bare between them, not to be solved, not to be erased, just to be seen, and maybe, slowly, healed. You think it ever goes away? Clara whispered. Elias shook his head. No, but it gets quieter, and it doesn't control you anymore. You learn to walk beside it instead of under it. A gust of wind rattled the windows, but neither of them flinched. Inside, the cabin was still, and Clara, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't feel like a shattered thing. She felt human. Cracked, yes, but not beyond repair. She stood slowly, and Elias did too. As she turned to go back to her room, she paused. "Thank you," she said, "for not trying to fix me." He smiled softly. "Wasn't my job," he said. "Just needed to make sure you knew you didn't have to fix yourself all at once either." Clara returned to her cot and pulled the quilt over her shoulders. Wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, the silence wasn't empty. It was healing. The next morning dawned gray and wet, the kind of rain that didn't roar or thunder but lingered. It fell in a steady, whispering rhythm against the roof, the windows, and the leaves outside. Clara woke to it and didn't move right away. She lay in bed, listening, her fingers tracing the edge of the quilt as her thoughts drifted like the fast rain itself, slow, heavy, and unspoken. Something had shifted inside her since last night. Not healed, not yet, but loosened. As if a knot inside her chest had finally been untied and her heart could breathe again. She got dressed, folding the borrowed clothes neatly on the stool, then stepped into the hallway. The smell of fresh bread surprised her. She padded into the kitchen to find Elias pulling a loaf from the old oven. Lily sat nearby, her chin resting in her hands, watching him like he was performing magic. "You bake?" Clara asked with a sleepy smile. Elias grinned over his shoulder. "Storm mornings call for warm bread. It's a rule out here." Lily looked up. "And honey butter," Clara chuckled. "Well, I'm not arguing with that." They sat together at the table, three souls who had all known loss in different ways, now sharing something simple and warm. The bread was still steaming when Clara tore into it, spreading the honey butter thick and tasting sweetness she didn't realize she'd missed. After breakfast, Lily brought out a stack of books and asked Clara to read one aloud. Elias excused himself to the back room, saying something about checking the roof before the rain got worse. The book was a worn collection of folk tales. Clara read slowly, savoring the sound of her voice filling the room with story. Lily curled beside her on the floor, listening with wide eyes, her curls damp from a morning of chasing the porch cat in the drizzle. As she turned another page, a soft knock startled them both. Clara paused. The knock came again, 3 short raps, cautious, unsure. Elias stepped into the room, his brows drawn. He moved to the door slowly and opened it a crack. Standing on the porch was a tall man, soaked through, his coat dripping, hat in hand. Clara couldn't see much of his face from where she sat, but something in her gut twisted. "Can I help you?" Elias asked calmly. "I'm looking for someone," the man said. "A woman, Clara Ames." Clara froze. She stood slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The man turned just enough for her to see him, and her stomach dropped. It was him. Jacob. Her former fiancé. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and he looked thinner than she remembered. But those calculating eyes hadn't changed. Not even in the rain. Clara stepped forward until she was just behind Elias. "I'm here," she said. Jacob's face shifted, part surprise, part relief, part control. That familiar tightening of his jaw made Clara's stomach churn. "I've been looking for you for days," he said. "I went to your house. You were gone. No note, no explanation." "I didn't owe you one," Clara replied, her voice steady. Stronger than she expected. Jacob blinked. "Clara, let's talk. Somewhere private." Elias didn't move, didn't speak. But Clara felt his quiet presence beside her like a wall of stone. "There's nothing left to talk about," she said. "I found your letter, Jacob, the one about my mother, about the land." He hesitated, eyes flicking to Elias, then back to her. "It wasn't like that." "I read your words," Clara said, "and for the first time I believed myself more than I believed you." Jacob's mouth opened, then closed. "I'm not going back," she continued, "and you should leave." "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're confused, hurt. This, whatever this is," he gestured toward the cabin, "isn't real." Clara straightened. "This is the most real thing I've felt in years." Elias spoke for the first time. "You've been told to leave. You should listen." Jacob stared at them both, but something in Clara's eyes must have told him he'd already lost. He backed down the porch steps, turned, and walked back into the mist. The rain swallowed him whole. Inside, Clara let out a long breath. Her hands shook slightly, but her spine stayed straight. Lily watched silently from the doorway, her eyes solemn and knowing. Clara turned to Elias. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring trouble." Elias shook his head. "You didn't. You faced it." She nodded, her eyes misting, not from fear, but from the weight of what she had just done. She hadn't run. She hadn't hidden. She'd looked the worst part of her past in the eye and let it go. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside something had broken free. And in the place of fear was peace. The rain let up that afternoon, leaving behind a forest washed clean. Droplets clung to every branch, every pine needle, glittering like the woods had been stitched with silver. The air smelled like damp earth and pine bark, and the wind had softened into a breeze that gently combed through the trees. Clara stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching the trail Jacob had disappeared down. It was strange how someone could haunt your life for years, then vanish into the trees like fog. She didn't feel triumphant, but she did feel something new. Lighter, free. She felt Elias step up beside her, not saying anything, just standing, the way he always did, calm and rooted. She could feel his presence more than she saw him, and she was grateful he didn't try to fill the silence. "I thought I'd feel more broken after seeing him," Clara murmured. "You looked the opposite." Elias said, "You looked like someone coming back to life." Clara glanced at him, her brow raised. "I was watching," he added, then smirked slightly. "Not eavesdropping, just making sure you didn't slug him." She smiled, then turned back to the trees. "I should probably leave soon," she said. Quietly. Elias didn't flinch, but his face lost some of its ease. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "That's the strange part. I don't have to do anything anymore." He nodded once slowly. "So what do you want to do?" The question hung between them, not casual, not rhetorical, but real. Clara exhaled. "I don't know yet." And she didn't. There was a house waiting back in town, a life she could try to rebuild. But it wasn't the life she wanted anymore. The land reminded her of her mother, but it also reminded her of everything she'd just escaped. She wasn't sure she could walk through those rooms without hearing Jacob's voice, or her own guilt echoing off the walls. But here, in this weathered cabin, something was changing. Not fast, not loudly, but deeply. Later that evening, Lily handed Clara a little hand-drawn note. Inside was a sketch of the three of them sitting around the fire, and beneath it, the words, "You can stay if you want. We got room." Clara knelt beside her, heart aching at the quiet kindness of the offer. "I don't want to take anything that isn't mine," she whispered. Lily shrugged. It's yours now. Daddy said sometimes hearts grow more rooms than we think. Elias looked up from the fire and gave a subtle nod. Clara sat in the armchair, staring into the flames. What would I even do here? She asked aloud, more to herself than anyone. Well, Elias replied, we always need help cutting firewood. Chickens need feeding. Lily could use someone who reads better than I do. And maybe the house could use a voice that laughs a little. Clara looked at him, eyes narrowing with mock suspicion. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a beginning, Elias said simply. Not the one you planned for, but maybe the one that fits who you are now. Her throat tightened. She'd walked into these woods as a ghost fleeing everything, unsure she was still someone worth saving. And somehow, a child's open hand and a man's steady silence had pulled her back to herself. I don't want to be a guest anymore, Clara said. I want to help, be useful, belong. You already do, Elias said. Lily, from her corner, added, we already decided your family. We just hadn't told you yet. Clara laughed through the lump in her throat. She'd never expected this. A quiet cabin. A broken man who had learned to carry love without losing himself. A child who understood sorrow better than most adults. She'd known and still chose joy. Clara looked around the room, the firelight, the half-finished bread loaf, the wool blanket draped over the back of the rocking chair. I'd like to stay, she said, and there it was, not running, not hiding, but choosing a place where healing didn't have to be loud, where she didn't need to be fixed to be welcome. Elias smiled, the kind of smile that came slow but meant everything. Then stay. Clara woke to the sound of morning birdsong, soft and layered over the hum of a world slowly stretching awake. The air was crisp, clean after the storm, and sunlight poured through the windows in long golden beams. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't feel the weight of dread weighting on her chest. Outside, the cabin yard was already alive. Lily danced barefoot in the dewy grass, arms outstretched. Like a little whirlwind, her laughter echoing through the trees. Elias knelt by the porch steps, mending a broken plank with calm focus, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sawdust clinging to his flannel. Clara stepped outside, blinking against the light, and breathed in the scent of damp pine and sun-warmed earth. Morning. Elias said without looking up, Thought you'd sleep in. I thought I might, Clara replied. But I didn't want to miss the day. He smiled. That's a good sign. She sat on the porch steps beside him, hands resting on her knees. You've built something rare here. It wasn't easy, he said. Still isn't. But it's honest, and that's more than most folks get. Clara glanced at him. Why do you think people find their way here? Out of all the places they could end up. Elias paused, wiped his hands on a rag. I used to think it was just chance. But maybe it's more like gravity. Some hearts pull others toward them when the timing's right. Maybe this place doesn't call to the lost. Maybe it waits. Clara thought about that. She thought about the days she'd wandered, numb and exhausted, with no clear direction. She thought about Lily's voice cutting through the silence. Don't cry, miss. My daddy helps sad folks. Now here she was, helping collect eggs, reading aloud from worn books, sitting by the fire as evening fell, wrapped in a peace she'd forgotten was possible. Later that afternoon, Elias handed her a wooden box. Inside was a smooth carving knife and a block of pale cedar. It's tradition, he said. Everyone who stays here carves something for the mantel. Doesn't have to be perfect, just honest. Clara ran her fingers over the blade, then glanced at the carvings already resting on the long shelf above the fireplace symbols. Initials, small tokens of lives that had passed through and left something behind. She worked on hers in quiet moments after supper, while Lily drew, while Elias fixed a broken hinge. While the sun slipped low behind the pines, she didn't carve her initials. She carved a tiny lantern. Simple, steady, lit. When she placed it on the mantel, Elias stepped beside her and looked at it for a long time. I like that, he said. Fits you. Clara tilted her head. How do you mean? You came in carrying nothing but shadows, he said. And now you're leaving light behind. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because she understood now, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring what you've survived and choosing day by day to keep going. And some days, it meant staying. That night, Lily curled up in Clara's lap during story time. Elias sat nearby, the fire dancing in his eyes. The cabin felt full, not just of warmth, but of purpose, of belonging. Clara read aloud, her voice strong and calm, and as she turned the final page, Lily yawned and whispered, "You're better than the stories, you know." Clara kissed the top of her head. Maybe it's just because I'm finally part of one. When the fire had faded and Lily was tucked into bed, Clara stood on the porch with Elias, looking out into the dark. The porch light glowed beside them, faint, but unwavering. You ever think about turning it off? She asked. Elias looked at her, thoughtful. No, he said, because there's always someone out there walking through the dark. Maybe they're not ready to knock. Maybe they're just trying to breathe. But when they are ready, I want them to know they're not alone. Clara turned to him, her voice quiet. I was that someone. He met her gaze. And now you're the one keeping the light on. She smiled full, soft, and true. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who's no longer running, who no longer sees herself as broken. The kind of smile that says, I stayed. And it mattered. And as the night deepened, the porch light glowed on for anyone still walking toward the warmth.